Hi, everybody. So this is the skeletal system, part one. Just some kind of introductory stuff relating to the anatomy of the skeletal system. First, a joke. It's funny. You should laugh. And then this is a picture, as you see, of Chichen Itza with the skull imagery. Okay, so the skeletal system is made up of several different parts. So obviously bones are the first part. Next are joints, which we'll talk about later. And then as we talk about joints in particular, we will also be talking about cartilage, and ligaments, which hold bones together. Ligaments are bone-to-bone connectors. And then finally, tendons. And tendons hold bone to muscle, or muscle to bone, I guess. So some of the features that we'll talk about today and in the coming week are caused because ligaments and tendons need places to attach. So an adult human body contains 206 bones. You might have heard that. Kids have more bones because what happens as you age is some of your bones fuse together, like the bones of the skull, for instance. So that's why that number decreases as you age. Okay, so like everything, bones have a structure and they have a function. And some of the functions are probably pretty obvious to you as a person with bones. So the first is support. Obviously, bones are what allow us to stand upright, not just be a puddle. Bones also offer protection. Oh my gosh. Protection for soft organs. So the heart, the lungs are protected in the rib cage. Like the pelvis kind of protects the bladder area and some of the digestive tract. Obviously the skull protects your brain. The skeleton allows for movement because of attached skeletal muscle. And then things that you might not expect, like those three, I think, are pretty standard, what you think of when you think of the skeleton. It also provides storage of minerals like calcium and fats. So in the bone marrow, in the long bones, there's a large quantity of fat, which is important for making cell membranes and all that kind of stuff. And then the final thing is that blood cells are formed in the bone marrow. So we'll talk probably a little bit more about blood cell formation when we actually talk about blood, but know that it happens inside the long bones. Okay, so as we said, the adult skeleton has 206 bones, and they are made up of two basic types of bone tissue. Spongy bone, which you can see here, and it's kind of porous. And then compact bone, which you see here, and it is compact. And so the proportions of each kind of bone depend on the shape of the bone. So that's how they're classified. So long bones are longer than they are wide. They have a shaft with 2 clear ends. And then they have mostly compact bone. So the femur and the humerus. The femur is in your thigh, the thigh bone, and then the humerus is your upper arm bone. And both of them kind of have the traditional, like, bone shape. This is a quality picture. But that kind of traditional bone shape, I'm sorry, where you have, like, the 2 ends and then the long bone in between. And this part is a compact bone, because that's where, if you think about your femur, your leg, the pressure is coming from above and below, right? So it needs to be strong that way. Short bones tend to be short and cubic in shape. They contain mostly spongy bone. So rather than that pressure being applied on an axis, it's kind of more spread out. And so the examples are the carpals and the tarsals. Carpals are in the wrist, and tarsals are in the ankle. And if you look on our skeletons, or if you look at the Quizlet, you'll see they're little tiny, like cubic or kind of oddly shaped bones. And so they don't have to absorb that same kind of impact. And so their structure is a little bit different. Flat bones tend to be thin and flat. They are often curved, which will make sense in a second. And they have kind of thin layers of compact bone around a layer of spongy bone. So kind of compact, and then spongy. And the big example of this is the skull. You can imagine the curved plates of the skull with this compact outside and then the spongy interior, helping it to absorb shock. Okay, and then the last are irregular bones, which have an irregular shape. Don't you like this naming classification? And they basically just don't fit in other categories. So the vertebrae are irregular. As are the hip bones. And the hips are 3 bones: the ilium, ischium, and the pubis. So those 3 come together to form the pelvis, the hip bones. The ones you think of as your hips are the ilium. Your hips are the iliac crest. Okay, so here's just some images, obviously better than my drawings. So you can see long bones in the arms and legs, flat bones in the skull and the torso, short bones, wrists, knees, ankles, and then irregular, kind of the spinal column and the pelvis. Okay, almost done. Bone markings are surface features of bones, and they can help you to identify the bone. If you were like an anthropologist, that might allow you to draw some conclusions about, what a person did in their life. But for us, it's really going to help us identify bones. So there are 2 main purposes for the surface markings on bones, two main causes, I guess. So the first is that they form attachment points for like muscles, so tendons, ligaments, muscles, because those need somewhere to connect, to hold the bones together, to hold the muscle to the bone, and for the muscle to like sit nicely on your bone. So for instance, on the femur, there is the greater tubercle, and that is where your big muscles of your thigh connect, for instance. Another reason that there are markings on the bone are that we need blood vessels and nerves to be able to move all throughout the body, right? And so there are also places where blood vessels and nerves run. Nerve. So sometimes there will be like holes in the bone where a nerve or blood vessel will pass through. Sometimes there will be like a divot. The most obvious example of this is the foramen magnum at the bottom of the skull. That's where the spinal cord passes through. And that is a clear marking with which you will need to be familiar. Okay, so kind of the last thing is just the gross anatomy of the long bone. And gross anatomy, remember, is just like big scale anatomy, macro anatomy, not like you gross. So of a long bone, so this we're talking about femur, humerus, radius and ulna, tibia and fibula, like legs and arms, basically. It consists of two parts. So the diaphysis is that middle shaft of the long part of the long bone. That is made up of what kind of bone? Compact is correct. That is where you will find the bone marrow. Will be the yellow marrow will be in that part of the bone. And then at the two ends are what are called the epiphyses. And epiphyses are spongy bone, and that is where you're going to read about this on Friday, but that is where the bones grow from, that epiphyseal line. So they'll grow outward from that. And that's it for part 1 of your skeletal system notes. Thanks. Bye.